Coming up on Network Africa, South Sudan's former rebel leader Riek Machar agrees to form a unity government with President Salva Kiir. The UN support mission to Libya hopes to resume peace talks after a rocket attack in Tripoli suspended the talks holding in Geneva. Plus, Lesotho's prime minister is to be charged with the murder of his estranged wife, Lipolelo Thabane. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Welcome. I'm Layo Adegoke. South Sudan's former rebel leader, Riek Machar, has agreed to form a unity government with President Salva Kiir following a meeting at State House on Thursday. Mr. Machar says the meeting with the president was on outstanding issues, and there is now a standing agreement to form the government on the 22nd of February. President Kiir has also confirmed this agreement. Before the announcement, it had been unclear if the deadline would be met, as key benchmarks of the 2018 peace agreement had not been fulfilled. The deadline had elapsed several times without an agreement between the two sides. Meanwhile, a UN human rights investigation is accusing President Salva Kiir's government and other armed groups of deliberately starving civilians. Investigators found access to humanitarian aid and other basic services was intentionally blocked, leaving more than half the population in acute need of food. They say millions of dollars of state money had been plundered by government officials and that they were collecting evidence on individuals for eventual use in court. Their report was published 2 days before a deadline to form a unity government.
Deliberate starvation is quite clearly occurring along ethnic and political lines in an effort to marginalize dissident communities as well as those perceived to be too disenfranchised to challenge the status quo or demand transitional justice mechanisms. Their day-to-day lives revolve around basic needs required for their survival. We'll be releasing a dedicated conference room paper on the cases investigated by our commission demonstrating how starvation as a war crime and as a crime against humanity has occurred and ought to be prosecuted. A major focus of the report is that millions of South Sudanese civilians are being deliberately starved or deprived of access to basic services, while up to 80% of monthly non-oil revenues are unaccounted for, having been diverted from official accounts by the country's politicians.
In neighboring Sudan, as an economic crisis endures, revolutionary volunteers have been deployed at the country's bakeries. The yellow-vested men are helping to crack down on the diversion of heavily subsidized flour to the black market and hope to expand their monitoring activities to flour mills and distribution networks.
As bakers in flour-stained cloth knead dough and slide trays of loaves into ovens in Sudan capital, a cluster of yellow-vested volunteers keep watch. The goal of the self-styled Guardians is to stem the smuggling of heavily subsidized flour and bread destined for citizens struggling through a long-running economic crisis.
Our role as resistance committees deployed at bakeries is about oversight. We're monitoring what enters and leaves the bakery. The flour before it's made into bread, the bread that comes out, who it goes to, at what time and why.
Bread was a symbol of the revolution. An attempt to raise bread prices was the trigger for the first major protest in the city of Adbara. For the past 2 weeks, the volunteers have been entering their data on flour deliveries, bakery closures and smuggling into a mobile app being piloted in Orkowit. The volunteers have already caught wheat or bread being smuggled out of bakeries. In one case, 2,000 loaves for sale at triple the price outside of Khartoum. The culprits got a police warning.
The application allows for the resistance committees to log reports on bakeries receiving raw materials, bakeries that are closed, reports on smuggling. All these reports go into one central database from all over Sudan. When the data is made available in one location, the right decisions can then be made to understand the problem.
Suggestions that subsidies could be lifted have angered some, but opinions are split.
My personal view is if the government removed the subsidy, it will still be better than the old regime coming back. Because I am sure that moving forward, it will only get better. Sudan will be better.
The volunteers hope to expand their activities to flour mills and distribution networks, and that the ARP will help reveal where smuggling and diversion of supplies is occurring.
The UN support mission to Libya says it is hoping to resume peace talks after the capital Tripoli was hit by rocket fire on Tuesday, leading to the suspension of the talks being held in Geneva. Tripoli's port was attacked by forces loyal to General Khalifa Haftar, who have been trying to capture the city since they launched a military campaign there 10 months ago. The city relies heavily on shipping to feed its population. The prospect of meaningful dialogue now appears dicey as Libya's UN-backed government of national accord announced the suspension of the talks until it sees a firm response. In the meantime, the mission is also condemning the attack on the Tripoli seaport by the Libyan National Army on Tuesday.
Government of National Accord yesterday notified the UN mission, UNSMIL, of its decision to pause its participation in the ongoing joint military commission talks in Geneva. And that was following the attack on the Tripoli seaport, as I mentioned, by the Libyan National Army on the 18th of February. The UN mission strongly condemned the attack on the Tripoli seaport by the Libyan National Army, and the mission has reiterated its call on all parties to respect the truce, to desist from escalating the conflict, and from targeting civilians and vital infrastructure. UNSMIL hopes to resume the second round of joint military commission talks. The special representative, Hassan Salameh, is in contact with the GNA's leadership in Geneva and Tripoli, as well as with international partners and member states to maintain the momentum.
The UN's International Organization for Migration is calling on the European Union to better ensure the safety of migrants fleeing Libya. The appeal comes a day after the port in the Libyan capital was attacked by missiles. Hours later, about 200 migrants who had fled Tripoli by boat were returned to the port. The IOM says the Mediterranean countries should share responsibility for providing safe havens to people rescued at sea. At least 1,700 migrants have been intercepted or rescued and returned to Libya this year. In a similar story, 274 migrants have now been rescued off the coast of Libya by the Ocean Viking rescue ship that was waiting for a safe place to dock. The men, women and children were rescued during 3 operations in the central Mediterranean on Tuesday and Wednesday. Amongst them were 22 women and 64 minors, most of whom were unaccompanied. SOS Mediterranean, who runs the ship with MSF, said in a press release. Now, the number of migrants living in Libya have jumped in recent months following fighting in that country. In September 2019, interior ministers from 5 EU countries agreed a new scheme to distribute rescued migrants to try to relieve pressure on southern states, including Italy.
I think what really stood out for me from this morning's rescue was just how incredibly distressed the people were as we were taking them on board. Many of the women collapsed onto their knees. They were unable to walk, unassisted, unable to move, uncontrollably crying, evidently having been through a huge amount. Whether or not it was relief, whether or not it was pure exhaustion, some people were hypothermic. But the team had to physically take them from the place that we were disembarking them from the rescue boats and then to the shelters.
To politics now, Tunisia's designated Prime Minister Elis Fakhfakh has named a new coalition government after reaching an agreement with another moderate Islamist party, the biggest power in parliament, and ending an ongoing political crisis for 4 months. With this agreement, the proposed government will likely win a confidence vote in parliament in the coming days, and the country will avoid an early election. Fakhfakh proposed the lineup of a new government on Saturday and then said negotiations will continue after another party sought some changes. President Kais Saied said on Monday he would dissolve parliament and call for an early election if the new government failed to win a parliamentary confidence vote. The proposed government must be approved by the deeply fragmented parliament in the next days. UN peacekeepers serving in the Central African Republic have been conducting military patrols with the Central African Armed Forces in Alindiao in the south of the country. The operation is to secure the civilian population and the displaced in the grip of the actions of an armed movement.
UN peacekeepers serving in the Central African Republic continue operations in the south of the country, patrolling with the Central African Armed Forces in Alindiao. They help to secure the civilian population and displaced persons in the grip of the actions of an armed movement.
Now the people they are feeling more secure from our patrollings because we are doing continuous day patrol, night patrol, joint patrol, foot patrols, vehicle patrols. So people are quite happy.
To guarantee the security of the population, the MINUSCA erected checkpoints in strategic places in Alindiao.
We have made arrangements to make the population feel a little safer. We organized to protect first the United Nations installations such as OCHA at the level of the regional hospital. Then we took into account the security of the Elim IDP Center. We have locked a 360-degree area between Elim, our base, and the roundabout here behind me.
With the return of security, the population there began to return home.
Peace is beginning to come back, which is why we have returned to the city with our wives and children.
At the end of January 2020, an operation called Mokiri enabled the MINUSCA, jointly with the FACA, to dismantle the illegal barriers installed by elements of the Armed Movement's Unity for Peace in the Central African Republic at the entrance and the exit of the city.
A Zimbabwean woman who was suspected of contracting coronavirus have been given the all clear. The state-owned Herald newspaper reports that the 27-year-old traveled from China to Zimbabwe and was isolated on arrival, but tested negative. Harare's Director for Health Services, Prosper Chonzi, says the woman worked as a teacher in the city of Wuhan, which is the epicenter of the virus. Mr. Chonzi said the woman was on holiday in the city of Guangzhou and became unwell, displaying symptoms of the COVID-19. She was, however, tested in China and given a certificate showing her results were negative. Well, the Prime Minister of Lesotho, Thomas Thabane, is to be charged with the murder of his estranged wife, Lipolelo Thabane. The police say the 80-year-old, who announced he would be stepping down in July because of old age, didn't comment about the case. Now, his current wife, Maisaya Thabane, has already been charged with the murder, and her trial is set to begin on 17th of March. Thomas Thabane would be the first leader in Southern Africa to be charged with murder while in office in a case that has actually shocked the tiny mountain kingdom. His estranged wife, Lipolelo, was shot dead 2 days before Mr. Thabane became Prime Minister. That's back in 2017. At the time, he described her killing as senseless, but the police now accuse him of being involved in her murder. You're watching Network Africa on Channels Television, still to come on the program. The Ethiopian government receives an 18th century crown that had been stolen and hidden in the Netherlands for 21 years. Fascinating. Please stay with us.